So it is a double honor for us to introduce and celebrate the 2024 winner of the Architecture, Culture, and Spirituality Forum Award for Outstanding Achievement, architect Marina Tabassum. In her Dhaka, Bangladesh-based practice, Marina seeks to create a language of architecture that's simultaneously contemporary, yet rooted in its place. One of the first buildings, one of the first buildings she undertook after establishing her own practice in 2005, the Beit Roof Jain Mosque in her own city, won the Aga Khan Award for Architecture, which recognizes design that addresses the needs and aspirations of Muslim societies. This mosque, commissioned by Marina's grandmother in remembrance of Marina's mother, was designed by a woman who had never before designed a mosque. We believe it stands for the values and principles that guide ACSF. Marina's design for Bangladesh's Museum of Independence has become a national landmark. Marina notes that this museum, quote, required a certain kind of silence, unquote. It is a building about sadness, grief, and the struggle of a people to create a nation. Its spaces are somber, contemplative, to call forth memory. Marina has taught at architecture schools around the globe and was just recently identified by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world for 2024. For her work in sustainable, socially responsible design. But I will say that we recognized her first with this award a few weeks before Time caught up with us. Please join me in honoring Marina Tabassum.
Please. Well, thank you so much. It is absolutely humbling to be recognized for, for the works that we do. I must say that I'm, as you know, that I'm from Bangladesh. That's where I was born, brought up in a war-ravaged nation, and there was no hope in many ways. So we never dreamt big in that sense. So it's always very, very humbling and very, I must say, very touching for me every time there is some sort of a recognition that comes my way. And it's not only me, it's my entire team, the people who work with me, not just the architects, but the entire team of crew who are relentless in many ways, working the kind of work we do. I will definitely share some of the projects today. Some of them are spiritual, some not. But thank you, ACSF. I'm saying it right? I'm always confusing the words, but yeah, thank you so much for this great honor. And really thanks to the juror for their unanimous voting. It really means a lot to me. And, I've been here for the last few days, 2 days maybe, listening to some of the talks and meeting all the nice, warm, really wonderful people. And, the things that I also cherish and value resonates so much with the group and the way they think that I think, I've probably become a member of the cult. So, yeah. Right. So Marina Tabassum Architects, that's my office. But to give you, generally when I show my projects, I think it's always important to kind of give you a background of where I come from. It's not a lot is known about Bangladesh in many ways. So it would be interesting to kind of give you a sort of a journey about Bangladesh, where it is, how it's formed, and how it informs the way I have, sort of devised my practices. So this is Bangladesh, all the rivers that you see, that's the Himalayan range, which is, Bangladesh is actually situated in the foothill of the Himalayas. And it's basically formed by three major rivers. One is the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, and the Meghna. And two of these major rivers, Brahmaputra and Ganges, comes out of the Himalayan mountains and then converging into one river and then flushing into the Bay of Bengal and then going into the Indian Ocean. And over centuries, the sediments that are brought in from the Himalayas, were settled and sedimented, and the delta was formed. And so Bangladesh, 2/3 of Bangladeshi land is actually delta, the Ganges Delta, and it is the largest delta in the world. And if you see, this is the map where you see all the different kind of water bodies that we have. We have more than 700 rivers, and we have wetlands, we have different forms of lakes and water bodies. So if you look at the map without the land, it's basically a waterscape rather than a landscape. So, so water actually is part and parcel of the way people live. And this is a very interesting image by NASA, 20 years data. And within 20 years, you can see how the rivers basically shift and change their position. So they're constantly oscillating between this direction and that direction. And in between, they form these sand beds that you can see. And these sand beds, what we call chor, I'll be using the word chor quite a lot, but these chors are the sand beds that forms in the middle of the river. It's a very dynamic water system, hydrological system, that is, bringing all the glacial flow and the monsoon rain from the Himalayas and then bringing it down to the Bay of Bengal. So looking closely, what you see here is what happens on the land. So it's basically, it's fragile, soft soil because it's all sedimentation. So it's bringing in, and then all the glacial melt that comes down, and also with the monsoon rain, it actually washes away a lot of the land. It has taken away many villages, many small towns and places like that. So it's a phenomena that is much more getting pronounced with the climate crisis as the temperature is rising. And this is quite an interesting image. You can see a mosque which is on the verge of being washed away by the river. People are still praying because it's still there. And so, you see a lot of these people who are becoming displaced and moving from their home and their location, becoming landless and moving to different places around the country, within the country. So there is an enormous amount of internal displacement within the country. Now, why does that happen? So if you see, this is a map of the rivers, and then there was this two major earthquakes that happened, known as the Assam earthquakes. And during the Assam earthquake, the movement, I'm just talking about the geoformation and the river movement. So the Brahmaputra river changed its course, and because of the changed courses, the Ganges and the Brahmaputra melt together and created this enormous force, which then later on created this whole system of land erosion. Now, if you go and see the sand beds that I was referring to as chors, these are the sand beds that form in the middle of the river. And these are transitory. They're not permanent. They can become permanent. It all depends on the hydrology and the hydrological system. But quite often, they're there for a certain period of time. Generally, people do not move there within 4 years of their, let's say, when they are surfaced. Within 4 years, people do not move to these places. But after 4 years, people start to go and populate. And so these sandbeds actually gives people, especially the landless people, place to build their home. And so it's almost like a beach in the middle of the river. So if you see, this is how the whole system works, the ecology of a sand bed or a chor. So in the first years, you'll see some grass growing, and then there are some new kind of different forms of fish, mud skipper fish, different animals starts to come in. And then by the third or the fourth year, people start to populate, and that's when they can grow some certain kind of crops which grow in the sand. And then slowly by the fourth year, they can start to populate with their houses, let's say. But after 8 years, if it survives 8 years, which means that it has sort of created a landmass, that's when the government comes in and people from all the other places comes in and starts to, put their boundaries. And I'll tell you why the boundaries happen. But this 4 years gives these landless people some time to occupy these land, to learn, to grow crops and to live a life in these places. And we've done some research in this area in 2018 and 19, and we've been asking people, why do you still live in this very difficult landscape? And they will always tell you this is home. And so there is no answer after that, that this is home. And there's also an economy that runs in these areas, because these are the places where one of the most sought after fish, which is the hilsa, is grown. So the hilsa economy is thriving in these places. So that's why this is also an economically very important place to be. So the research that we did was basically on on this whole movement of water and land. And so this is a map which you see in the middle, which is in orange. This is a map which is known as the Cadastral Subdivision, or CS map, that was done by the British East India Company when they came to India. And so these are one of the first maps of the chores that were formed in that time. So sometime around 1700 something, let's say. And so these lands were formed, or let's say consolidated in maps by the East India Company to be able to generate a certain kind of economy for them, because these were not owned by people. People did not own chores. They are just a phenomena. So they thought this could be a nice way of earning revenue, because people would go there and they were already doing cultivation in these spaces. So whoever wanted to go and cultivate these lands had to pay a certain amount of tax to the East India Company. That's how they generate their revenues. But if you see it now in current Google map, you'll see that most of the land doesn't exist, because this is from the 1700 whatever time that they actually made the map. And but that map has become a binding, like it's a documented land, but it doesn't exist, and it's kind of constantly moving. So this is the British document, let's say, when they actually did the lease documents. So these are the lease documents. And you can see we traced one plot of land, which is plot number 1862. And it starts from 1972 to, let's say, 2015. We just saw that within the, whatever is available in terms of Google data. So you'll see that the land exists in 1972. But then by the time of 2000, the land is kind of vanished. And then slowly, if you see in 2015, it's almost gone. So this document, which is a lease document, when the British left after 200 years, they sold or auctioned these documents to the local Bangladeshis. And the local Bangladeshis bought them as land. And so that land slowly became a part and parcel of the whole inheritance. And so you see in that document, you'll see the whole inheritance, how that document became inheritance of these two people who are still owning that, but they're actually owning water. So they kind of wait till the land resurfaces. And the land can resurface at different times. So after 8 years, they go and reclaim the land. So which is a very difficult situation, in a way that it was a sort of an idea of a dry culture, a land based dry culture that was imposed on a wet culture like Bangladesh. So while we were doing this research, we also saw that how these people actually live in these areas. So this is a vernacular house form, which is actually made out of wooden frame and corrugated sheet facades. And generally, when they understand that there will be a sort of a riverbank erosion, they generally take down their houses. So it's a kind of a flat pack system that has been there in the landscape for, let's say, more than 200 years. And so basically people take their houses down, as you can see over there, that they take their houses down, put them on a boat or a cart or any way they can, and move it to a safe location. And so you can buy these houses in the market. And we have marketplace where you can buy the houses which are looking like this. And they could be 2-story houses, they could be single-story houses. So even before IKEA came up with an idea of a flat pack system, we actually had it in Bangladeshi landscape. So which is kind of interesting, and they're quite beautiful also. So we were showing our research in the Sharjah Architecture Triennial in UAE. And so we bought 3 of these houses and we shipped it to Sharjah in UAE. And that's where we actually showcased our research. So this is Sharjah, and in the school where the Sharjah Architecture Triennial are generally held, we were given a courtyard, and that's where we actually placed these 3 houses. And they're beautiful houses, actually. They're still there, so they actually acquired it from us, and they're using it for different purposes. But these houses cost about 4,000 to 5,000 US dollars. And for a chore dweller, let's say people who are living in the sandbeds, this is a lot of money. They cannot afford a 4,000, $5,000 worth of house. So this is how they live. And when we were there doing our research, this is how we met some of the families who are living in these kind of shacks. They do not invest a lot of money. First of all, they don't have it. Secondly, they know that this land it's not their land, so they're basically landless people, and they need to move anytime. So basically, they do not invest a lot of money in the houses. So during the COVID time, that was in 2020, when we were all sitting idle at our offices, there was not much work going on. A lot of questions came about the whole idea of this climate crisis and how people need to move from one location to another, and how our, this extraction based living, and not enough replenishing that's going on. And Bangladesh being one of the countries which is really facing this whole climate crisis, because we are seeing sea level rise. When we were doing this research in the coastal areas, we've seen the change in the ecology and the biodiversity. So it's one of the countries which is actually threatened by this whole sea level rise. And so that's the time when we thought, these people who are becoming displaced, this is going to increase over time, and we need to do something about that. So during COVID time, when, as I was mentioning, there was much less work in the office, we sat together and kind of decided on working on a house system, which could be flat pack. Again, the same idea, which is already there in the landscape, but would be less expensive, lightweight, easy to carry, and also uses local material. And at the same time gives them 2 levels, so that during flooding, they could also stay on the upper level. So you can see the image here. The idea was that it could be created in a group, like a village, and there could be 2 levels where the upper level could be used as a flooding time. And this could also be moved to a city or wherever they go, and they could recreate this house. So this was just certain illustrations that we came up with. And basically, this is a system that we developed sitting in office, no engineers involved, just a few architects. Bamboo, steel connectors, a very basic space frame structure, which can be easily brought together with these steel connectors. And we have this roof, which is corrugated sheets, because it's easy to move and take with them. And bamboo grows everywhere in Bangladesh, so it's a very local material. So once we designed this, we made the steel connectors, and we called it Khudi Bari. Khudi means small, and Bari means house. So it's a small house idea. And we basically, MTA is my office, and Foundation for Architecture and Community Equity, it's a foundation that we have created. With the foundation and the office together, basically we decided that this would be an idea which will be an intervention into the vernacular architecture. So the idea is that we can populate this can become a common knowledge of people, where they can actually build these houses. So these are certain visionary ideas, I would say. So the first house we built during the COVID time, and these are the two architects who actually built it. And we tried it out. It's a sturdy structure. It worked. And once we understood that it worked, we brought in a few engineers, and they were quite fascinated by it. How did you do it? Of course, we didn't have any data as such in terms of structural data, but we could see that it works. So the next idea was, let's take it to one of the locations where we actually, were doing our research. So we took it to one of the sandbeds. So that's the location of the sandbed in the middle of the river. So to go there from Dhaka, you need to take a boat like that to go to the mainland. And from the mainland, you take a smaller boat, and that boat takes you to this kind of a sandbed. And this is the elevation, let's say, of the sandbeds that are in the middle of the rivers. So this is a sandbed, and the river is up there. You can see a tiny little boat and the horizon, and where the sky and the horizon meets. And these are the sandbeds, which are there for more than 4 years. So they are already cultivating these spaces, and one of the houses is right there. So with the community, we built several of these houses there. We talked to the community who were living there, and they were happy to try out this idea of a house. And so the idea was that they will build the plinth, we will build the structure and the roof, and the facade of the lower floor, the community will come together and they will start making, and that's the toilet. And the facade that you see, I'll talk about that later. So this is again another house which is a bigger family, so they needed 2 modules. So this is like a 2-module house. Our team, these are all architects who act like builders, basically. They're also builders. And so the team of architects, engineers, our volunteers are going and working together. This is one of that houses that is 2-module. And so once you finish it, this is what it looks like. It looks like a regular vernacular house. The idea was that it should not look something different than what they are already used to, because that's a mental construct of a home that exists in the mind, and you cannot give them something so alien a form that they would have difficulty in accepting it. So the idea was it has to be something which looks very similar to the houses that they are used to. But they have an upper level and a lower level, and these are tall grass that grows in that land. So generally that's what they use for their houses. So that they take the grass and they weave it and they make a facade. So the facades could be anything. It could be anything that they can find. It could be corrugated sheet, it could be grass, it can be jute sticks, whatever there is available. And so this is upper floor, that's the lower floor, some of the houses, inside of the houses that they generally, the way they live. This is without the facade in the lower level. And so once we built those and people started using it, and they kind of appreciated it, we sought grant. So from the Swiss Development Corporation, we got a grant for 100 houses. So with that grant, we basically located 4 different locations in Bangladesh, the areas which are regularly getting flooded or have these different kind of geographical and climatic issues. So this is a brochure that we make where it tells about how the houses are built. We take it to the local communities, and nothing is pushed onto them. It's all about coming together, working with the community. We ask the community to decide if anybody is interested in having a house like that. And so you see, that's the whole system. So the women looking at it, we have community mapping. We do wealth ranking so that we understand who is a deserving candidate. And then we have workshops where we also try out with models to give them an idea of what it is all about. And then that's how we build it. And we also show them some videos of all the other places where we have built these houses. Bringing in material is quite difficult in these sandbeds. So quite often we just bring the bamboo and the steel connectors, and the community basically works together and build these houses. So we've built all these houses in different locations, and they have gone through like 3 years of climate cycle, let's say. And so, we have thunderstorm, we have flooding, we have all different kinds of water phenomena. So this is one of the locations where we have built. So this land that you see is actually man-made sort of embankment, and it's all surrounded by water. And this water actually comes from the Meghalayan range, where Cherrapunji, which is the highest rainfall region in the world, all the rain that happens in Cherrapunji comes and collects in Bangladesh. So generally during the dry season, this is what it looks like. People generally have paddy fields, and that's one of our houses. The mountains that you see at the backdrop are the Indian land, which is the Meghalayan mountains. And then during the monsoon season, when Cherrapunji gets all the rain, this is what happens. So it collects all the water before it goes into the ocean. And these are some of the images that shows, within this cycle, during the thunderstorms, the local communities' houses were completely perished. And you can see one of our houses is still standing there. So it kind of shows that it does withstand the wind pressure. And this is during the flooding, when water was rising. So after the water receded, that's one of the images there. So this project has gone to different places. This is during the Royal Academy summer exhibition last year or year before maybe. And we've done some of these nice illustrations showcasing how this whole project works. And this is an illustration done by Orin Joy Shen. And these are kind of beautiful way of showcasing. The last one is an image of the refugee camp. And so we have built some of these houses in the refugee camp. And as you know, Bangladesh hosts about 1 million refugees coming, Rohingya refugees who are coming from the Rakhine state of Myanmar and staying in Cox's Bazar, that orange marked area. And that's what the refugee camp looks like, part of it. Very dense, one of the densest refugee camps. And that's the map of the refugee, one of the refugee camps where, more than 1 million people are living at the moment. And these are actually the shelters. The darker the places, that's the densest the shelters. If you go closer, you'll be able to see that. So these are some of my students' works from Yale University. They went to the refugee camp and we did some projects there. So one of their works. But when we were working with World Food Program, and based on this Khudibari idea, we built some of the projects there. And again, it's the same way of working with the community, where we showcase the different kind of ways of building this structural system, which we call Khudibari. And one of the houses that we built was the first house for us to live in. So we needed to go and live there. It's the work required, because it was a very community engaged project. Right outside the refugee camp, we actually built a house for us. And you can see this used to be a forest land. And to house the refugees, the forest, part of the forest land had to be cut and, make settlements. And this is actually the forest. And so we took permission from the forest department when we built this house. And this is actually a 3-module Khudibari. So we built a house which we are giving to people, but at the same time, we are also wanting to live in one, to be able to understand what it looks like and to live like. So two buildings, let's say, and in the middle we have an atrium space. So the team who works, and we have the facades made out of bamboo. Upper level is where we sleep at night. The lower level is where we are working together. So if you see here, you can see the 2 levels, upper level for sleeping, the lower level also, when we have too many people, then we sleep also in the lower level during the night. And that's the team who works in the refugee camp. We have community architects, builder architects, we have, landscape architects, builders, engineers, so all together, and also a dog that we adopted, or he adopted us maybe. And so this is one of our projects during the, in the refugee camp. We were designing women-friendly spaces or women-led community spaces. And it was important for us to have these kind of working with the community or the refugee community to be able to understand what their needs are, so that we can actually give them the best possible solutions. And so the programming and the designing was developed with the community. Though we don't speak the same language, we had people who could translate it to us. And so these are refugee women who made models. They were telling us exactly where they want their rooms. And if you can see, there is this nice little drawing in the middle, that's a garden. And they wanted a garden. That was their only need because they live in such a dense situation. Garden, and when we talked about how was home like in Rakhine State, they always talked about their gardens. And so this is what their needs were. And it came out of the idea of having this community coming together and engaging with them. And that's how we basically designed the structure. So again, the same idea of Kudibari structure. I must say that in the refugee camp, there is a restriction of material. You cannot use any material you like. Bamboo is one of the only materials that they allow. And then there is also a restriction of foundation. You cannot go beyond, let's say, 2 meters or even 1 meter, I think, maximum 1 meter that they allow you to go underneath in terms of foundation. You cannot, so there are lots of restrictions because the government of Bangladesh expects the refugees to be repatriated. So they don't want any kind of permanent structure in the refugee camp. So Kudibari actually gave us a very good solution because it doesn't require a lot of foundation. It could be built on a low foundation. So we added 3 modules, and that's how the whole thing, and you can see the garden in the middle. We have the toilet facilities on the sides. So the garden now looks quite beautiful. Now this was from the older times, but now it's a really thriving garden where the women really likes it very much. This is from the outside of the refugee camp looking into the building. So these are some of the spaces which has these bamboo lattice work, and the upper level where generally the women actually spends time and kind of sleeps. This is sort of a refuge for them. So in a way, to me, this is very sacred. This is very spiritual in many ways for people to come and, especially women, to come and just spend their time. The children, their steps going up, and it's the same system as we have designed in the camps and in the let's say the chores where we are building houses. So they call it House of Peace or Shanti Khana in their own language. So they really like the space because it gives them a certain kind of peace. So that was my works that I'm doing through the foundation, just to show you. So now I think it would be a nice break to bring you to the city of Dhaka, where we generally do our practice. So Bangladesh, as you can see, is a Tropic of Cancer cuts through Bangladesh. So it makes it a subtropical climate, which means we have a dry season and we have a monsoon season or the wet season. So 6 months we have rather hot and humid and heavy rain. And for 6 months we get a very dry season, which is the wind is coming from the north, from the Himalayas, so it's dry and it's cooler. And so generally, this is how architecture would be built in our location. We don't need a lot of insulation, nothing. You just need 4 columns and a roof and a plinth to keep you above the water level. And that's what architecture really required. And so this is one of our first modern buildings designed by Mazharul Islam, Bangladesh's first architect in 1952. And this is the Fine Art Institute. And there also you can see it's a very open idea of wind flow, circulation of air, and making it as light as possible so that there is no edges or boundaries. So these are one of our very first projects where we were also trying this idea of openness, blurring of the edges. So you see that the facade or the outer layer and the inner layer, there's just a very basic screen, and that's basically it. Many of our projects, again, tries to work with that. These are some of our works that we've done in the city of Dhaka, where the idea of bringing in glass, but at the same time, creating a certain kind of shading that the building can actually operates on its own without the necessity of having air conditioning, so you can open the air building glasses and have the airflow, and it can also give some sort of shading. The other thing that we really work on is the courtyard, the idea of a courtyard or an atrium, because it allows you to create the stack effect through which you can create the circulation of air. And quite often, this is also something that we work with. Many of our buildings always have a central courtyard, and this idea of creating this airflow and draft. So one project, which was the embassy, it's the French and German embassy. The French and the German shares an embassy in Bangladesh. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. It was those days when everything was very promising. And so basically the French had the land and the Germans paid for the building. And so it was an interesting combination. And generally the embassies are designed in a way that where, it's basically very high restriction area. So they have setbacks from all sides. So we were given a very small footprint on which we had to work. I just added this project because of one person's request. So I'm just showing you this. We won the competition, but later on it was given to a French architect. We didn't get the chance to build it, but well, that's how it is. So that's the central building, and the idea was to create this central atrium, which could actually generate this whole airflow. And the offices were on the edges. We tried to create corner cuts so that people could not look into the building from the outside, because that's also one of the requirements. So these are some of the sections, and that's what the building would have looked like if we had built it. But yeah, I'll just go very fast. Again, another small building which we built, central atrium, a 9 square grid plan, 4 corner courtyards. Again, as I was saying, that this breathability of a building has always been an important aspect whenever I have worked. So basically creating a central atrium to let the airflow happening, and then pavilion-like spaces where people can spend more time, maybe on the roof. You see that I use a lot of brick. You probably see a lot of these projects where we use a lot of brick. This is not my project. This is one of our archaeological sites. This is a Buddhist monastery. We have several Buddhist monasteries from the 2nd, 3rd century BC. And you'll see that anything which needed permanence in the Delta always took earth, baked it into brick, and made structures like that. And generally, the vernacular architecture was always with mud, except for the ones that I showed you, which is because of the movement, they needed to take at different locations. But otherwise, all the houses are made with mud. But permanent architecture, which is about power, has always been made out of brick. And we have beautiful, these terracotta temples, intricately curved with stories of Mahabharata and Ramayana. And so you can see all of that exists. And we have beautiful brick masons and craftsmen who actually does wonderful brick work. So if you want to source anything locally, brick is our material. So the city of Dhaka, where I am based, started from the river Buriganga, which is there, and then moved to the north and now to the south. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the world. It has about 20 million people living in the city. It's one of the densest cities also. So the density is about 24,000 per square kilometer, which is immense. And so in a way, for us, it's all about building high. So it's also always about apartments, buildings, but we also have this. It's a beautiful project, beautiful building, inspirational. It's our parliament, as you know, by Louis Khan. And this has been an inspirational building for me as I was studying architecture in my formative years. So this is the city of Dhaka. So we have these two different conditions, which you see quite often in many Asian cities, these two different situations where one cannot do without the other. It's a kind of a symbiotic relationship, but again, one is called formal, the other not. one is visible, the other is invisible. So this kind of paradoxical relationship exists in the city as elsewhere. So one of our projects is, I'll just show you again, as I was mentioning, that it's all about stacks of floors so that we can accommodate enough people. So this is one of our buildings, one of my only developer built projects, because I do not design for developers because of the restrictions of time, efforts, the ability for an architect to produce anything good. So this was one of the only projects that I have designed. And basically the reason was it's on a major spine of the city of Dhaka. And so I wanted to create something which would give the city back a nice kind of a looking into a building which is not just about the 20 families who are living in there, but also for the entire city. So that's the plan, as you can see. And it's about bringing in the airflow from the south and then taking out through the north. And this is the west facade. And so, yeah, and it also looks onto the street. And I didn't want the street to be occupied by the, the houses that you see here are more or less looking into the street. We try to not give that and make the building look north and south, because that's where the wind directions are. Okay, so very quickly, I know I am running out of time, but I hope you're not falling asleep. I just have maybe two or three more projects to show. So this is the city of Dhaka, and you can see the density and the immenseness of its constructed areas. There's only very few green spaces left. That's the Parliament complex. There's some lakes in between, and there are certain areas which is still green. So this is what it shows to some extent. One of our project, which was designed in 1997 for a competition, which was the Museum of Independence that you can see here. This was a competition that we won after 2 years of our graduation. And so very early, I was 27, 28 years of age at that time. And this was the site, which is actually a park, one of the last remaining parks in the city of Dhaka. And that site was chosen to be built into a museum and a monument to independence. So I'll talk a little bit about the monument and the whole thing, but that's the project that we won the competition, and we were allowed to build it. But the idea was to take a minimal footprint that was required for the building. We went for a non-building approach. As you can see, you don't see the building. So it's like a landscape, and we have an elliptical walkway that gives you a certain kind of a look from different directions. So, and a reflecting pool. So basically, the reason for choosing this site is because this is a very historically important site. This used to be a horse racing ground during the British colonial time, that during the Pakistan period became a very politically active location. And then we had a war of 9 months between the Pakistan Armed Forces and the Liberation Army of Bangladesh, Mukti Bahini we call them, and the Allied Forces of India together. And on the 16th of December, in the same location, the Pakistan Army surrendered. So just to give you an idea about Bangladesh's birth. So as you can see, Indian subcontinent, when the British left India, they subdivided it into 3 parts. 2 parts, the purple parts became Pakistan, and the blue part is India. And this was done based on the consensus done in earlier in 1909, where it was basically seen how the density of the Muslim population and the Hindu population. So based on Hindu and Muslim religious belief, the whole subcontinent was kind of divided. And so that part, which is now Bangladesh, became East Pakistan, and now Pakistan was West Pakistan. And this remained, and as you know, that this was done in a very short period of time. It was a very roughly drawn lines. One of the largest forced mass migration that happened in 1947. And Bengal got divided, so that was Bengal's map, the orange line. And from Bengal, the West Bengal remained with India, and the east part became Bangladesh, or at that time, East Pakistan. And my family actually comes from the West Bengal side. And within a night, they had to move, shift from their own home, and just had to kind of leave everything behind and go towards this site, because our family was Muslim, and they needed to shift from the Indian part, which was then predominantly becoming more Hindu population. So this was a rift that happened. And when my father came, he was 6 years old, and he brought with him that little thing, which is actually a base of a hookah. And for whatever reason, a 6-year-old thought that was very precious. And that's the only kind of connection that we have of our home, or what it used to be at that time. So basically, between 1947 to 1971, it was a time of quite a struggle, because even though Islam was the only reason for this whole country being created, there was a huge cultural difference. We spoke two different languages. That created the first rift in 1952, when Pakistan decided to make Urdu as the official language. And predominantly, most of Pakistanis were speaking in Bengali, like us, because Bangladesh, or the East Pakistan, had more population than West Pakistan. And even in West Pakistan, there were other languages. But so that created an very sort of a rebellious situation. But over this time, there has been many different kind of issues, that at the end, in 1971, the Bangladeshis decided that they wanted to become a free nation. And we had a 9-month long, very intense war, where the Pakistan army was trying to subjugate the rebellion forces. And it was a genocidal war. A lot of people lost their lives during that time. So in 1997, after a very long time, the government decided to build this monument to commemorate this idea of independence, and to build a museum. So the idea was that it's not just about celebration, or it's not just about the freedom of people, but it was also gained through a selfless sacrifice of a lot of people. So how do you bring these two duality together? And so what we did was we created this non-building approach, where we took the museum below grade. And if you see it here, it's much clearer. So the plaza that we created is actually for celebration. And the museum underneath is about the history. So freedom, dream, aspiration generally seeks an upward direction, which is about positivity. It's about the celebration. And then sadness and loss always urges for the subterranean. You wanted to hold it within yourself. So that's why we thought it would be nice to just take the museum below grade. It also works in the urban context, because it gives you that expanse of the park that you really need. And the only few things that is on the plaza is a water body, which is circle in the middle. And then you have the Tower of Independence, and there's a wall that takes you below grade to the museum. So this is what it looks like now with the tower and the plaza. There are lots of people who comes and visits these spaces. This is the central pool. The mural wasn't our idea. It was later on added by the government, as you can tell. And so this water body has this central hole which draws the water into it. And as you can see, the tower, I'll talk about it later. But that's the plan of the museum below grade. So there is ramp that takes you down. There's an audiovisual room as you go down. The reason for the universal access was because we had a large amount of freedom fighters who has lost their ability to move about. So we wanted everybody to be able to come to these spaces. So every space in this museum is, can be universally accessed by everybody. And so you can see there's no column. The walls act as columns, and the central chamber also acts as a structural system. And so these are the spaces where we have different artifacts, not really artifacts, it's mostly visual, so printed visuals. So the ramp takes you down, some light comes through as daylight, and then you're brought into the space. There's some images and also documented events of the whole struggle from 1947 onwards till 16th of December. And so you can walk through them. These are printed on glass, so these images also reminds people. And then we have this area which is, we call the dark space, which actually has images of the genocide and the killings that happened during that time. And so from there, you can access this space. This doesn't have any kind of any sort of visual or anything in this space. It's a very contemplative space, which actually is a space to commemorate to the people who has lost their lives, to kind of stand or to be there and to remember the loss of people. No light, except for the light that comes through that oculus and the water that's drawn in to that space. So the water column and the sound of that space really kind of creates an atmosphere which is, I think, very, sort of goes with that whole atmosphere of sadness. This image you already seen. So as you can go up slowly through the spaces, then you come to the Tower of Light. This is a monument to the freedom, but the way we thought about it is that we wanted to, how do you capture freedom, or let's say independence? That's something of a feeling, it's not something to be seen. And so the idea was to create a Tower of Light. And the only way we thought would be an idea to explore is to create it with glass. And so we created a space from structure in the middle, and then we had this glass stacked one top of the other, almost like a brick. So you see glasses are stacked, thick glass, it's about 25 millimeter thick glasses, and stacked together to create this kind of prismatic effect, which during the daytime, when the light falls through, it creates this kind of a very glowing effect. And so, yeah, that's another image where children are also playing in the reflecting pool. But that's kind of the idea that we had in mind. And in the night, it gets lit from the outside, and it turns into this beacon of hope for a young nation, a nation which is even younger than me, if you consider me young. Okay, so that's that's in the evening. From the reflecting pool, you can see the light of the city and everything. I'll show you three small projects, not really small, but three projects, which are, as I said, I'm not in the city of Dhaka because it's a domain of developers. So there's not much to show in the city, but I'm more on the periphery of the city because that's where, different kind of situations are happening. That's transformative. That's a place where it's going through different kind of transformations. And I find these places very interesting to work. And so one project, which is the mosque, is the blue dot on top, which is the northern side, which I'll show you. And right across the river here, Burigonga, on the other side, we have built two projects, a community center and a small memorial. And these are more just to some extent to do with spiritual connections. So I'll show you these. So this is the city, the older part of the city. And you can see that's one of our Mughal monuments, the Lal Bagh Fort, which exists, one of the only forts in the city of Dhaka. And it's kind of surrounded by this, growth of the city, unplanned, and small parcels, and you can see the density that's there. One project that's right in the middle here is a community space or community center that I was asked to design by the member of the parliament of this constituency. And it was right before the election, and he wanted to showcase that he is going to deliver certain projects in this area. So he just called us up and said, can you give me a drawing within like 2 weeks? Uh, and I just want to, I want to build this community center, but I want a few images. We understood that it's his election pledge. So within 2 weeks, without even visiting the site, I thought it's not going to be done anyway. Let's just produce something. You have to do that at certain times because we've been working with him in other projects. So we designed something and we gave it to them. So there were these images, nice renders. Maybe I have one. So this is one of the renders that we gave him, and they kind of had it on their election pledge that they will make this community center, and they won the election, and there was nothing after that. They went quiet. So we thought, okay, this is not going to get built, so forget about it. Architect's life, move on. And and then all of a sudden we get this call that we have already done the foundation, we need more drawings. It was like, oh my God. So it was like a really difficult time. Like, how do you, I didn't even see the site. So I said, okay, let's go and see the site first. And so we went there, and then they had these images all, and my name underneath the big letters. It was like, it was really something. So anyway, so this is what finally, it wasn't as bad as we thought. It's a very basic building. We had this, the services at the back, and then the ground level is more or less open space, which they use for different reasons, and an atrium in the middle. So that's the building that finally got built. So we have an atrium in the middle, and then the spaces are used for different reasons, for different kind of community events, that the community comes together, for films, for dancing school, all kinds of activities that happens, and all the services are at the back. That's the main atrium space in the middle where you come up, and we have this central, and the idea was that the airflow would happen through this, and the building can still be ventilated. So that's the sides. So that's one of the projects which is outside of the city of Dhaka. And these are, certain things that you need to kind of encounter when you are working in these kind of situations, where so this space is quite nice, where people generally come and gather. This stair also gets used as a sort of an amphitheater with a little events. The other project, which is also again the same family, the same political leader, and in the same area, where right next to the river, they had one of the houses. So these are very politically active family. He's a minister. And so the house, they had one house, and maybe I can show you if I can move the cursor rightly. So this is a house that they used to have built in the 60s. And then after that, this entire plot, within that, they forgot about the house because they moved to Dhaka. It's outside of the city, which is in the southern part. Here they built a cold storage, which was for potatoes and things like that. Then they built another building, which is a garment industry. And then at that one point, this little area became a kind of a residual space. This house, this old house was actually forgotten. And later on, when the father died, they buried him here. So you can see all kinds of things happening in this site. So if you see, so there is this whole place. So that's the cold storage, that's the garments factory, and on the other side of the plot there is this other factories that are happening. So this became a residual space which had no use, and the old house was dilapidated. It was sort of falling apart, and the river being in the front, nobody used that place anymore. And one fine morning, he came and told us that they wanted to revive this place because the father's grave is there, and they wanted. And the other thing is that the first draft of the Bangladeshi constitution was written in that building, which was now falling apart. So now we needed to revive this little narrow little space that is kind of residual. So how do you deal with this kind of a space? That became one of our major concern. So you can see that's our plan. It's a very narrow site, and the road has become much higher than the site itself. So we needed to cascade it down so that the water could go to the river. And then the narrowness of that long tail from the road where you entered the site, like this area, had to be sort of, we had to break it down in a way so that it creates spaces. We had to redo something with the old building, and we were also given another smaller building here, which is actually a storage building for the garments factory. So all of that together. So what we did is, this was the older building in the middle, and it was partly falling apart, and the foundation has completely was not working, failing completely. So we added another sort of a plug-in to the building so that we could add foundation, but at the same time hold the main structure of the building. So after renovation, this is the building facade, which was the existing facade. We just restored the building's facade on this side. And on the other side, we have created this space, which has now become a kind of a memorial space for the father, and the Constitution of Bangladesh that was written in that space. So that's the light and the space that you can see. And as you can open, you enter the space, and that's what it looks like. So that's one of the buildings that we kind of tried to rework. And the other building which we were given, which was the storage space for the garments factory, we inserted another kind of a building within it, keeping the outer peripheral wall, because it's a beautiful brick wall. We didn't want to tear it down. So we just inserted another volume, and we kept the walls as it is. And then we just added a space, which became a kind of a space where the family can gather. They can come in and use the spaces as, we had 2 bedrooms and a dining and a kitchen space in that area. And the long space that I was showing you, we broke it down into a few different courtyards. So this is one courtyard, which is from the street side. We have a concrete building, kind of a pavilion, and a brick pavilion, and a central water body. So that's the pavilion. And so it kind of broke down the entire narrowness of that space, and the water body adds a certain kind of a sound, and you can see the pavilion, and through that the river. So these are the pavilions, one the brick and the other one in concrete. So that's the space. And then from the brick pavilion, as you go in, you see the building, and then you also go to the father's grave. So that's again the landscape, and that's the grave of the father. And there's a space where they can come and stand and kind of have a little prayer if they like. So now I'll show you the mosque, for which I've been keeping you all up till 83 minutes of my talk. So that's the blue dot, and the mosque is on the northern periphery of the city of Dhaka. And this is a place which is again going through a lot of transformation. It's a transitional state because the city is growing, and it used to be an agricultural land, but now it's completely filled with settlements. My grandmother, who actually is the client for this project, so she basically invited me for a cup of tea. I went to her. She was sitting with her drawings and plans because she owned some land in that area. As I was telling you that my family comes from the Indian side. So when they moved to Bangladesh, they had to exchange land with Hindu families who moved to India. So the Muslim families exchanged lands with the Hindu families who moved to the other side. So my grandmother's family actually had some of these lands which were exchanged in that same manner. So part of the land she wanted to donate to build a mosque. There was no mosque in that area, and it was sort of, as I was mentioning, that people were starting to build settlements, people were coming in, making new houses. So even in 2005, when this prayer was happening, in 2006, you can still see that there's a haystack, and it's still a very village atmosphere, which slowly turned into something completely different. So that's my grandmother sitting in that white sari. And so after that prayer that I showed you in 2006 September, she passed away the same year in December. So it kind of became a promise that I made to her that I needed to build this project. She left a certain amount of money to do, I mean, with that money, I probably could do foundation, but the rest of the funding I had to raise. So I became the client, the designer, the fundraiser, the builder, everything in one. And so it started basically in trying to understand what is a mosque. That was my first question, because in the Indian subcontinent, women do not go to mosques to pray. At least when we were young, in those days, women were not going to mosques. They were always praying at home. Mosque was mostly for men to go and pray. So my recollection of mosque was almost next to none. And in 2005, I had the opportunity to come to this city actually. So that's a kind of an interesting connection, where I spent a lot of time going to the Hagia Sophia, to the Blue Mosque, to the Rustam Pasha Mosque. There's so many beautiful mosques and spaces which were very inspirational to my understanding of the space and spirituality, and how light plays an important role in this whole idea of spiritual connection. But to go back to the idea that where mosque came into being, and so that image is kind of very interesting and very important, because during the Prophet's time, when the first mosque was built after when he migrated to Medina, it was built with a date palm tree as it was, the basic construction system in that time, and it was done in the same manner as a house was built. So basically, for a mosque, it needed to be elongated for the congregation. So it's a house form that was elongated, turned into a larger congregational space where people could gather to pray. But at the same time, it was also not only for prayer, but for many other reasons. People were coming together in the mosque to learn about the new religion. It was also about diplomacy. It was also about administration, judicial activity, community gathering. So there was lots of reasons why mosques were being used. And as you know, that the direction of the mosque is also an important, especially the prayer space is important. So for a mosque to actually work, you need the right direction. You need a congregation, if it's a congregational prayer. You need somebody to lead the prayer, and you need a clean space and the ability to clean yourself in terms of washing. And so that's it. That's all you need. The rest of the things that are now attached to mosque is actually liturgical elements that has over time has grown. And as Islam moved, let's say, from the Arabian Peninsula towards east and towards west, you see so many different forms of as it has taken the Cordoba, let's say, even Salimie in Edirne, or the mosque in Mali. You can see all different forms, even in Bangladesh, especially in our delta. These are the mosque form that we had. So you can see that wherever Islam went, it basically adapted to the local construction technique, the local climatic aspects, the material that was available in that area. So all of that actually gave these mosques different identity and its style. This is our mosques, I would say the most authentic mosque forms from the Sultanate period. So you see that it's a very sort of this openings, and quite often some of them had domes, some did not, because the whole construction technique that was available at that time did not have that idea. But this is what you see nowadays. Do you see the mosque? It's yeah, so that's like a quiz. So this is what has happened to the symbols. So it kind of, I was looking at the idea of the question that what is more important, the symbol or the act of praying? This connection with the divinity, or the reason why people go to pray. So I was looking more into the idea of spirituality, and these two spaces for me has always been very inspiring because of the way light plays in these spaces, and also the infiniteness of this whole spaces. So basically, keeping that in mind, looking into the site and the idea that it's a transitional situation in this whole context, I kind of started to think how to address this. And then, of course, we have our own historical ideas of a Buddhist monastery, a Hindu temple, to a mosque form, to our parliament. So all these different ideologies and ideas. And then from there, kind of this is what I developed. So basically, the site gives me a certain kind of a city grid, which is this square, the outer square, which is the site of the aligned with the road. And then for the Qibla direction, or the direction to the Mecca, we needed to turn another 13 degrees. So which would give you this central space, which is the prayer hall. And I didn't want these corners to create this kind of a difficult situation. So I added this drum in the middle, and that drum actually facilitated this movement. Whereas when you enter the main prayer hall, you don't feel that movement anymore. It kind of dilutes that whole situation. So that's my initial, let's say, conceptual drawing, kind of developed through the idea of this whole architectural, the solidity of brick mass and load-bearing structure. So that was the outer periphery, and the main mosque is, or let's say the prayer hall, is in the middle. And the corners between the circle and the square became open to sky spaces, which I was talking about, atrium and the idea of stack effect, the air to bring out. So all those things are still there. So as I said, that I had to raise funding. So I reduced the use of concrete to only the prayer space where I didn't want any columns. So it became a very kind of a column-free span space. And the outer periphery, which is the wrapping of the building, became all load-bearing structure. So it's all brick, as you can see here. So that's the plan. So you enter from this side through the colonnade, but you do not enter into the mosque immediately. You take a few bends on this side and on that side to these square courtyards. And from there, if you come this way, you have the ablution area from where you can enter the mosque. That's again another entry over there, another one, and the toilets are on the side. The idea was that, people go 5 times a day to pray, and you are in a different mindset when you're entering a mosque. You need a few bends to be able to then concentrate into the act of praying, to go into that space. And so these bends were necessary to bring people into their whole, idea of coming to a prayer space. So these are the drawings. As you can see, the section down there. The other thing is about the porosity of the brick, which was also important to bring in the airflow. So this is the situation, which, remember the image of my grandmother sitting next to a haystack, and this is what it is now. So it's already a growing area where at one point you will not be able to see the mosque anymore because all these buildings are growing. And so looking outside was not important anymore. It was more to look within. And that's the reason why it was important to bring in the light. As you can see, these are all buildings coming up from the city's road, and you can see that as the buildings are growing, at one point people won't even have a place to gather. So the mosque for me is also a space for people to come together. It's a kind of a refuge. It's not a space only for praying, but also for other activities, if that can be generated. That was also an idea. That's the reason also I decided to not have to address the the ideas of having domes and minarets, the symbolic aspects. So this space is already quite vibrant, actually. Generally, people sit around. You can see children playing. All the plinth area is quite often very much used by the locals. That's the entry colonnade. And as I was mentioning, the porosity of brick, which is quite often you see in many of the mosques with all the intricate mashrabiyah or jali works. That's the main prayer hall. And that's the light coming through from the open to sky space. So that's the main prayer hall, which actually is, getting light from the sides, wall being washed with light, bringing into it. And throughout the day, this light creates a very interesting formation. It kind of creates this very sort of an interesting atmosphere when you are there. And these dots are there at a certain period of the year. In certain period of the year, it disappears. It's not there anymore. So no two visits would ever be the same. I mean, I've been there so many times. None of my visits are the same. So it's kind of interesting the way the building actually works with the whole site. So yeah, so that's right after we won the Aga Khan Award, we had a nice lunch with the local people, and so we used the mosque space to have that function. The program happened there. And last but not the least, another small mosque, but I'll go very fast. So that's a house that was a very old, 300, 400 years old house belonging to a family, which was, again, went into disrepair. So there was a conservation architect who repaired it, actually. Let me show you the image. So that's the building, a very small building with four rooms and a living dining space. That's the house. So it was sort of restored by one of the architects who was a restoration architect in Bangladesh, Dr. Abu Said. And then he asked me if I would be interested in designing a mosque, which was right outside the house complex, which was not in a very good shape. So this is, you can see the whole house right there. And there is a boundary around the house. And right outside the boundary, there was a little mosque here. And there's a water body right in front where people generally do their washing. And then they go and pray in the mosque. So that mosque was in a really bad disrepair state. So we had to redesign and rebuild that mosque. And I took that challenge because it was a very small project. I designed this mosque in half an hour. So this is the drawing. That's the mosque, actually. So basically, that's the house. As you can see, we designed it in a nice carpet manner. You can see the pond right here, kind of a beautiful drawing. And so this is the basic idea. And it's in a village-like atmosphere. So we wanted to make it a pavilion so that you can see the greenery that's around you, and it allows the air to flow into the spaces. So it's a very basic plan where there is no column in the middle. These are all load-bearing brick structure, and the whole building is on these walls. That's the section. We tried to bring in light from the sides to wash the wall on the edges. So that's the mosque as it looks like now, with all the openings. As you can see, that's the pond. That's the house at the back. This was during the construction time. From within the house complex, where we have a small garden and the boundary wall. And so this is the project, very tiny little mosque, and the toilet facilities outside on the edge, as you can see. And then this is the load-bearing structure during the construction time. These are all taking the load of the building. And so this is after we finished it. And you can see the roof is actually being supported by the brick walls. That's the main direction of the Mecca, the openness of the spaces. The idea was to create this height was not as much, so we wanted a very sort of a reflecting floor so that it doubles the space when you're there, so that it kind of creates a much, that it gives you the feeling of being a larger space. That's the congregation and the prayers, some of the little details, and I will finish it here. So sorry for 99 minutes of my you should all go home and sleep now. Thank you.